Well, for more on the G20, Pieter Cleppe joins us now from Brussels. He's the Editor-in-Chief of BrusselsReport.eu. Pieter, thanks so much for joining us. This G20 comes at a crucial time because of growing strains on the global economy, largely due to COVID. What's your sense of how much of an urgency, an urgent overtone there was there?
You have these calls by China and Russia on the West really to have mutual recognition for their vaccines. In the West, you have the issue of so-called booster vaccines that are seen to be particularly important to protect older people for whom it is already more than 6 months since they had a vaccine. I mean, clearly in all countries in the West where you have a high vaccine rate, high vaccination rate, you see that the COVID crisis is definitely much less severe than 1 year ago. But as I mentioned, these boosters are still an important challenge to basically make sure that the most vulnerable keep good protection. On top of that, there's of course the massive challenge to make sure that the rest of the world also gets vaccinated, and this basically takes time. But I think for richer countries, I mean, if they're wondering, okay, how can we actually provide development aid, I think for once it's pretty obvious how to do that, to make sure that these countries get vaccines as soon as possible.
Leaders agreed to what's been dubbed a historic corporate tax deal that's really meant to make it harder for multinationals to hide their tax profits. That's at least in theory. This was a U.S. proposed decision, a U.S. proposed proposal, I guess I should say. The American Treasury Secretary saying it'll be harder for American global firms, but that it was still the right and much needed thing to do. Was that the consent there about this corporate tax, that this is indeed the right solution?
I think leaders indeed have gone along with this particular U.S. proposal, but I think you can question if it is the wisest strategy. I mean, in the first place, it's not sure that this will be implemented in the United States, that this will actually get through Congress. We'll have to see. But also more fundamentally, I mean, is really trying to limit corporate tax competition the way forward. I mean, especially smaller countries, think of Ireland, for example, have managed to really develop from a low base as a result of their low corporate tax rate. It was not the only reason, of course. I mean, if countries are willing to make spending cuts and efficiency improvements, and then are able to reduce their tax burden, and in this way attract foreign investors, but also reward domestic innovation. I mean, what is wrong with that strategy? So I think it's a bit of a dangerous path to take, frankly.
What sort of role is the issue of climate change playing there at this summit? There were protesters outside, and of course the UN's Climate Change Summit in Glasgow starts on Monday. So how significantly is it featuring in those G20 leaders' discussions?
Well, that is a very important issue. So indeed, there's a vocal minority pushing for ever more aggressive climate action. But today, across the world, we really have what you could call an energy crisis. There's definitely one in China. There's definitely one in Europe. I mean, energy prices going through the roof. And people, especially in Europe, are really second-guessing not so much the idea that they have to reduce CO2, but sort of the strategies that have employed so far. The enormous subsidies that have been given to wind and solar farms, and nevertheless only managed to improve this particular technology to a very modest degree. Definitely in Europe, the eyes are turning back to nuclear energy as a potential source of energy that is also CO2 neutral. So if you don't want gas, if you don't want coal, and at the same time you want to reduce CO2, more and more scientists and energy experts, I think, are now coming to the conclusion that you need to look again at nuclear energy. Of course, maybe not the old-fashioned nuclear plants, but the new generation, very small ones. Amazon would be considering this. Also, France has announced to go for these very small modular nuclear energy reactors. Now, we're still not there. I mean, these things take a lot of time, but I think this debate is changing. And I would dare to predict quite a radical overhaul of energy policies, especially in the West. On top of that, of course, in China also, the Chinese government is also changing its policy in this regard. They're once again looking again at coal, but I predict also in China people will take a new look at the great potential that nuclear energy has.
Yeah, Xi Jinping this week announcing emissions targets for China, zero emissions neutrality before 2060. No doubt we'll hear lots more about this conversation coming up. Pieter Cleppe from BrusselsReport.eu, thank you.